and ways that will surprise us. Trains have changed the world. From Australia's searing outback, they bring iron ore. Across mountain ranges, out of deserts, into the great ports and cities, they bring everything from gold to fresh fish. We will see trains that are miles long, trains stacked high with containers, trains that travel hundreds of kilometers along tracks that never see a passenger. And trains that speed beneath the English Channel. As we tell the story of the great workhorses. In 1664, Sir Percival Willoughby wrote that, along the passage now laid with rails, carriages are in use. He was describing Woollerton Wagonway, considered by some the world's first overground railroad.
Back into medieval times, where there are examples, for example, in German mines, of wooden-wheeled vehicles on wooden rails, in which people recognized that if you have a rail and a wheel, the rolling resistance is reduced, and therefore you can move large goods quite easily.
Hard wheels and hard rails. Whether pulled by men or, as on Woollerton Wagonway, by horses, excel because of rolling resistance.
Then you take it right back to the late 1700s in the northeast, in Tyneside. They had horse-drawn railways that backed a cart onto a staith above the River Tyne, dropped the coal into a river.
And from 1830, railways have meant the train carries more tonnage per unit of traction, per unit of fuel consumed, and per numbers of staff involved than its competitors.
A lot of those early railways were about producing links from ports into the hinterland to provide part of what we now call a global supply chain.
Trains, as we will see, have been used almost everywhere to transport just about everything, and freight remains vitally important. Freight is the only reason why many railroads were built.
Linking the resources of those countries, whether it's sheep or cotton or what have you, to the imperial centre.
Some of the most powerful trains in the world cut across empty landscapes, carrying ore from the rugged places where it is mined to the ports. One such railway is in Africa, the Mauritania Railway. It is a good example of a workhorse.
African railways were largely built from a point in the interior to a point on the coast to move mineral or, natural wealth, whether it be timber or whatever they're taking out, right? But they weren't built certainly to move people.
There is only one railway line in Mauritania, and only one reason why it was built. Freight. It carries iron ore 704 kilometers from mines on the edge of the Sahara to Nouadhibah on the Atlantic.
In many countries, railways were built in order to extract minerals and other raw resources, which would sometimes be processed in that country.
The great travel writer Bruce Chatwin confessed that one night, caught in a sandstorm in the Western Sahara, I understood Muhammad's dictum. A journey is a fragment of hell. The trains making the hellish journey out of the Sahara on the Mauritanian Railway are up to 2.5 kilometers long. But that is well short of the record. In the Pilbara region of Western Australia, there are, quite literally, mountain ranges made of iron ore. There is very little else. The railway lines that snake through the Pilbara, linking mines with Indian Ocean ports, form a network of well over 1,000 kilometers of track on which no passenger travels. But trains do. Monster ones.
You're getting incredible human efficiency in that, one person is controlling this much train.
The record, set in 2001, was a train that was 7.3 kilometers long. It hauled 99,732 tons of iron ore in 682 cars. The 275 kilometers from the mine to Port Hedland.
Because it's out in the middle of nowhere and it's not causing a safety problem or a perception of a safety problem, you can have these unmanned trains. And that's probably how some of this is going to go long term.
Imagine that there are no trains. The iron ore is still there in the Pilbara and Mauritania, instead of feeding the global economy.
Raw resources often would be taken to the already industrialized countries in Europe or the United States for further processing, and then often would be sent back to those countries and sold back to those countries at a profit to the producers in Europe and elsewhere.
Australian miners have, in recent years, shipped most of the ore to the great building and infrastructure boom that has transformed China. And that export trade has fundamentally fueled the expansion of Australia's economy. Iron ore accounts for 17% of the value of Australia's exports. Not without trains, it doesn't. Most of Australia's coal depends on trains to get to the ports and to the export markets. Coal adds another 14% to the value of Australia's exports, but not without trains. And without that coal, power generation in some of the world's most dynamic economies, China, India, would be compromised. The glamour of the Orient Express, of the bullet train, will always appeal. But we should never understate the impact of the unglamorous workhorse.
Railways are the most efficient way to move certainly heavy goods over long distances, in that you use a lot less fuel and you use less, there's fewer people involved. So you can have, one or two men, however many people you want to put on the train, but you can have one driver, say, or two drivers, depending on your local labor practice, handling a very, very long train.
A contrast to monstrous ore trains, hauling loads hundreds of kilometers out of the Sahara or the Australian outback, is the 169-kilometer line from Kiruna in Sweden to Narvik in Norway. It was built in 1902. It too is all about iron ore and, for that reason, was of great significance in the Second World War. The high-grade ore from Kiruna was a vital part of Germany's munitions manufacture. It was to safeguard its transport to Narvik that Germany invaded and occupied Norway. For the rest of the war, Hitler remained convinced that an attempt would be made by the Allies to retake Norway. For that reason, there were never less than 12 German divisions stationed there. They never saw action and would have been of far greater value elsewhere. But they had to keep the port and the railway open. Of even greater importance were a few quite short journeys, from the mine to the port, without which the British Empire would have failed, instead of flourished in Victoria's heyday.
Without the railways, the empire could never have developed, and indeed without coal and coal suitable for shipping, it could not have developed.
From the mid-19th century, Britain's great maritime empire spread to achieve its sun-never-set status. Trade to and from the empire depended on Britain having by far the largest navy and the largest merchant marine in the world.
They needed raw resources, and they also needed a supply chain that was protected. And so you had the development of navies, especially the British Navy, the all-powerful British Navy.
Almost 1/3 of the world's merchant tonnage was British, and there were 2,500 British ships at sea at any one time.
At that time, South Wales Coal, by popular acclaim, produced the best steam coal, not just in the UK, but in the world. And in fact, South Wales Coal was a major export out of Barry Docks right across the world.
Trade depended on the Royal Navy, and the projection of British power and protection of the seaways depended on the Navy's ships being at sea. And to be under steam, they needed coal.
It's reputed that the first £1 million cheque was signed in Cardiff for a coal product. And the coal not only got used within Great Britain, that coal was also sent out to the Empire.
A humble railway, less than 50 kilometers long, suddenly assumes world-changing significance.
The coal would be brought down the valley, loaded either at Cardiff Docks or Barry Docks, and taken out to the Empire.
The mines in the Welsh valleys, which themselves have, for many years, used the rolling resistance principle to bring coal to the surface, pulled by pit ponies, load the train that goes to the port. The ship sails and replenishes the coaling stations in Britain's necklace of possessions around the world. The Royal Navy stays at sea. This combination of trains working above and below ground to extract mineral wealth has transformed economies and landscapes on every continent, including North America.
You get a sense of the importance of the railway in Canadian history by the many museums that have been set up, preserved station buildings, boxcars or cabooses restored and placed at stations.
The Quebec, North Shore and Labrador, begun as recently as 1950, is detached from any other line in the Canadian network. Described as a ride into the wilderness, it exists for one reason, one that is becoming familiar. Iron ore. The deposit was known about, but it was in 1936 that the interest of geologist Joseph Retty was roused, when a local Indian walked into his office with a promising sample. Such rocks, he told Retty, lay on the ground, and Retty confirmed that they were indeed scattered like raisins in a gigantic fruitcake. The Quebec, North Shore and Labrador's ore trains are the heaviest in North America.
In North America, we routinely run trains. I mean, it wouldn't be unusual to have a train that's 10,000 feet long. I mean, that wouldn't be unusual at all. And you can get trains, up to 21,000 tons.
Unlike the railways in Mauritania and the Pilbara, the Quebec, North Shore and Labrador now also carries passengers on a wilderness journey, during which they see no roads and no towns. But there is no wilderness quite like the one that the railway penetrated in pursuit of that mineral, which excites and inflames like no other. Gold. Everything follows the gold. Even the railway. On July 17th, 1897, the headline of the